Welcome to this week's episode of Beyond the Reformer. I'm Nick, and I'm the host of Beyond the Reformer, and I love asking the questions to the amazing guests that we get. I'm also a studio owner. I've been a teacher for 15 years, and for the last 2 years, I have been an educator. And it's been an amazing transition to go from being a teacher to being an educator. I had one of my educators mentor me on this, and I remember what she said to me. She said, when you become an educator, you start to look at this work differently and it makes you go deeper with it. And that's definitely been the case for me. I have had quite a few DMs over the last few weeks of people asking me similar things along the lines of, Nick, I hear in your episodes you talk about this subtlety, you talk about the power to change lives. And even though I've got a really top notch teacher training qualification underneath me, or I'm in the middle of doing one, what do you mean by that? Because I don't think that I fully understand. And so I thought today I would answer that question and give you some guidance on some teaching tips to help you plan your classes with a bit more ease and start to tap into these differences that I'm talking about and the subtlety that we've been talking about. The thing that I want you to understand is that these things don't change overnight. So if what I'm saying doesn't align with what you're doing, A, don't use it if it doesn't feel like it's what resonates with you. This is my view. This is what works for me. This is what works at my studios. It's what I've seen work for clients. But you are your own teacher. So be your own teacher. I also think, though, that if you do like what I'm saying, don't think that tomorrow you can just change. It's okay to unlearn before you can learn. I think Ava Rodriguez said that in her episode, and it was such a great comment because the process of unlearning isn't just a switch off. It takes some time, but you might want to filter some of these ideas into your teaching or just consider it and see how this stuff lands with you. The first place I thought we would start today is thinking about the way that you plan and structure your classes. When I go to different studios and when we have teachers coming into our studio to audition to come and work for us, I see lots of differences in the way that people were taught to structure their classes. I fundamentally still follow the structure that Polestar Pilates taught me, and I just think it works really well. If we think about this work as predominantly reprogramming the nervous system, we need to think about how we can structure a class that allows somebody to take in the most amount of information to learn some ideas, some thoughts into their body, into their mind, into their nervous system, and then challenge them. So, this is never about not challenging. It's about how do we challenge someone in a way that we've set them up for success. That's my big thing I talk about in my studios is it's really easy to teach something that's hard, and it's hard because you can't do it. What I'm more interested in is how can I teach you the strategies that you need to then understand a big move and have a decent go at being able to achieve it. So that means that your class structure needs to build you up to something. I also think that most people anyway, don't do Pilates to be good at Pilates. They do Pilates to be good at life. And so I always like to structure my classes from a place of lying down, and we'll talk about why that is, to ending standing so that they can walk out of the studio and take on board what they've learned back into their life. I sometimes go to classes and at the end, they'll do some feet and straps, and it is a nice stretch and it kind of leans into that yoga, savasana at the end. And so I'm not against it, but I don't think it does such a good job of taking on board the movement patterns and embodying them to take into your life. So I always like to start my classes supine. It's not to say I won't have done a check in standing up, but once we get into the movement, supine. I like to do some unraveling. We can only build strength from a place of ease. And most people who come to my studio anyway are super stressed out, and we need to unravel them energetically, emotionally, and unravel tension in their bodies. If we don't do that, then we're building strength onto a system that's imbalanced. And they might feel some short term gains, but they're never going to get very far with it. So, supine is a great place to do this. We can do some breath work. We can also use some of the Pilates, the pre Pilates movements, I think are wonderful to kind of make something feel meditative with movement. I love that Pilates is meditative and mindful, and it provides this kind of balance in our bodies as well as the strength and tone. Like, that is a great use of an hour for someone who is super, super busy in their life. So, supine legs is where I start because supine is where you feel the most relaxed, you feel the most safe. You also have the most contact with a surface. So your body is being given the most amount of information. So for me, I'm always thinking in these supine legs and then I do supine arms. I always think, what information do I need to give these clients in order for them to understand the challenge that's coming later? So I often plan my classes backwards. I think, what are my big moves in this class? And then what do I need to teach them? So I start at the end, I then go to the beginning, and then we'll look at the middle in a moment. So the supine part is setting the scene, sowing the thread, sowing the ideas where it can be slower. You've got more time to be able to teach the strategies that are needed. If you're trying to teach those strategies in the big moves, you can't hold people in those moves. It's going to feel uncomfortable and they're not going to know how to do those moves very well. So I'm always interested in supine legs followed by supine arms. And then I always finish with some standing work. And ideally, I want it to be more than just one roll down. I want to do some standing work with them that takes on board everything we've done in the class and that allows them to feel this movement. At the end, I'm also going to really ask them to tune in. So tune in at the beginning, notice how they're feeling, tune at the end, notice the change. I think Brent Anderson said this. Maybe he copied it from someone else, the head of Polestar. But if we don't notice the change, 60% of the benefit of that class has gone away. We've got to notice how it feels different. If you ask one of us, I would hope one of us listening to this at the end of a class to describe how something feels, you could probably give me a decent sentence, maybe a paragraph, maybe two paragraphs of how it feels in your body. If you ask someone in chronic pain, they can barely tell you if something is good or bad because they have lost the ability to feel in their bodies. So I think it's really important in classes at the beginning and in the end to give people a chance to notice how they feel. Notice without judgment. Just notice. There's no right or wrong. How are you feeling as you start this class? And then how are you feeling at the end of this? And give them a minute. Alexander Bolander talked about this in his episode, that meditation at the end of class. It's like 1 minute of breathing and noticing. And it is amazing because people notice it. Not only does it really work in terms of getting people's nervous system to pick up this information, it also sells your services because people are going, wow, I feel taller. I feel more grounded. I feel more open. My pelvis is more wow. My breath has more room. I sometimes say people like, if this feeling had a color, what color would this be? And people are like, whoa, like blue just popped into my head. So we can really play around with this. But I think a big part of how we create this change and how we create this subtlety is getting people to tune in and to notice themselves, because most of life, like, we've lost the ability to do that. And I think that's what makes Pilates so powerful. So we start with some supine legs, we start with some supine arms. And in a beginner type class, we'd have quite a lot of those movements in because that's where we're going. But then we would look to mix in, and you can do these middle bits in any order. We want some seated work. There's lots of seated exercises that we've got. We want lots and lots of spine articulation. I always think it's funny that Pilates is famous for the core because I don't really understand it. For me, Pilates is famous for the spine. We get our spine moving in so many integrated ways that, yes, works the core and so many other muscles and integrates us. But really, for me, Pilates is what helps my spine feel really great. And I'm sure you've got clients that at the end of a 2-week holiday, they come back and they say, I feel rotten. I've not done my Pilates because the spine is so good. So we need to be doing spine articulation. I go to some of these fitness Pilates classes and there's like barely a spine exercise in it. For me, that's such an important part of this. We need to be looking to move the spine in all its different ways. I see lots of classes missing out extension. Our world is full of flexion. And Michael King said this in my interview with him. He said, Joseph Pilates created his system in a world we don't live in anymore. We live in this seated, sedentary world. A lot of our lives are flexed over. We're working at a desk, we're looking at our phones. So, extension is so important. But extension is often very difficult for people because they're quite stuck in flexion. And because they're stuck in flexion, we need to look to bring in more rotation before we do extension. That's a really nice tip to help people find extension. And we need to think about what are the strategies that somebody needs in their body to be able to do extension well. So they need good scapular mobility, for example. We could bring that into the supine arm part of it. We need them to understand the front line of their body. We could bring that in somewhere else. So we need to be looking at some seated work, some spine articulation work. We also want to include some weight bearing work. So, how are we getting people weight bearing through their extremities, arms and legs, things like your quadrupeds, long stretch sequence, those kind of things, and starting to introduce this quite early on so that people get used to loading and again, learning the strategies of how do I weight bear effectively in Pilates. We can really teach that so that you don't feel your wrists are super grumpy. And again, we could think about, well, what are the strategies somebody needs for that? Well, again, the scapula come into that. We could link that in, for example, in our supine arm part. So we could be teaching a lot of the same exercises week on week, but depending on where we're going, our cueing would shift to lean into the strategies we need for the bigger pieces. Quadruped's going to feel like a bigger piece to a beginner. It's not going to feel like a bigger piece to an intermediate or a more advanced mover, but it's not to say you wouldn't have it in there with them. We also want to look at full body integration because it's all well and good to do our dead bugs and our bridges and our arm arcs, and these are all really powerful. But we are creatures that have full body integration in our daily lives. So we want to use movements that start to get people feeling more coordinated in their bodies. And I think this is another place that Pilates is so good for. The equipment, the props can really help challenge this. A quadruped is going to feel like full body integration for a beginner. Whereas you might put that as a weight bearing exercise for more of an intermediate mover. So, can you see how exercises can be in more than one category, but this idea that we're going to give them this full movement experience? When someone is a more experienced mover, you'd get them out of supine legs and supine arms pretty quick, but it's still in there because it calms the nervous system, it unravels you. But you would then move them through, and you would notice that a lot more of your exercises are full body integration. Because one of the things I talk a lot to my students about is it's not as simple as beginner, intermediate, and advanced because you can have a really experienced mover who's got an injury or a restriction. But we could look at the exercises in a bit of a different way. And we could say the more intermediate and advanced exercises have lots of the fundamental building blocks put together. So, dead bugs, just moving my legs. Quadruped, I'm now moving my legs and moving my arms and I'm weight bearing. So, you can see how you need to have how do I move my arms? How do I move my legs? How do I weight bear to then do a quadruped? So it can start to help you realize how we can link our cueing in to give these threads through a class. And I think this also lends itself really nicely to another piece of feedback I get from students all the time. So, students who have often trained maybe elsewhere and they've maybe not been given this framework and they are spending hours class planning. You are going to burn out if you're spending hours class planning. We teach efficiency in our movement, and as teachers, we need to be efficient in our class planning. You can keep the structure of a class pretty consistent, change up about 20% of it week on week. But because some of those bigger moves at the end might shift, the whole emphasis of the exercises can shift. And so you don't need to reinvent the wheel every time. I got this advice from Diane Nye when I was a new teacher. We've had 2 episodes of her on the podcast. They are the biggest episodes because she has so much wisdom. She makes things simple. She takes the fluff, the fanciness, she just makes things easy. This transformed me. And I remember a client saying to me in my early days of teaching, Nick, sometimes I'd really like to practice and not feel like every week I'm learning. And that combined with what Diane said totally just gave me the belief that I could make this a lot simpler. So I pretty much have a standard class plan ish, and I mix up a few things. And because I'm then trying to get someone to understand some of these bigger movements or more complicated spinal movements, I'm going to shift even my pelvic clock. I'm going to shift what kind of arm movements I'm going to do. I'm going to shift the cueing. So our cueing will link into where we're taking somebody so that a class plan doesn't need to just be a set of exercises. It is a journey to get somebody somewhere so that they can walk out and feel like they have been successful. I think for me, that is one of my studio Soul's key principles is that I want to set people up for success. I want people to, even if they couldn't master the exercise completely, they don't have extra mindset that thinks I'm a failure, that they can really see, okay, now I know why we're doing these bridges or this pelvic clock or these arm arcs or this mermaid. Like, I know why we're doing that because I now need to go back to that and get that a little bit more in me so that I have a better chance of this exercise. I was in a class yesterday with one of my wonderful instructors, and she did this really fun kind of choreographed sequence with some like rotation of the knees that kind of came into a side plank that came back. Not that complicated when you looked at it, but actually was demanding a lot of hip mobility. But she'd started the class with lots of work around that. So when one of our regular clients was really struggling with it, he really understood that the regressions were going to get him there and didn't make him feel like a failure. And I think that's another important point in our teaching is the class structure and the exercises that we put in are a part of it. But the way that we talk about these exercises is very important. And the way that we bring in progressions and regressions is so important because everybody wants, in my experience, to do the harder level. If you want to go harder, let's go here. Well, who doesn't want to go harder? Instead of, if this is feeling good, come with me. If this is where your challenge is today, stay here. It leans back into that people noticing themselves, nourishing themselves, do what their body needs and not what their brain is telling them they want because some marketing has told you that you have to keep pushing, pushing, pushing to the point of exhaustion and to the point of injury. If we can get people noticing in their bodies what feels good. I have a rule in my studio. You only do things that feel good. If it doesn't feel good, please put your hand up and let me know. Because we also want to empower our clients to feedback and notice if things aren't feeling good and it not to feel like it's our fault as teachers. You gave me this exercise. Well, I don't know you. I'm teaching 12 people in a class. I want you to have been taught enough to be able to tune in, to notice what's feeling good for you and to take the challenge if the challenge is right for you today. But if the challenge is not right for you today, to enjoy the version that you can do without feeling like you're some sort of failure because you couldn't keep up with anybody else. I say so often to clients, they'll be like, oh, well, I had to adapt this and I had to adapt this. And I say, you don't notice in the 12 people in my class, 6 or 7 of them have all had their versions of adaptations. Do they? Yes. But it's your world, isn't it? Like, this is your class. And some of that language is also important. Like, how we set a class up is important. Like, this is your hour for you. This is 55 minutes for you and your body. If anything is going on outside in your life and it's not helpful for Pilates, park it outside so that people can focus in. And then we could think about the kind of cueing that we do that also lends itself to the subtlety and to the mindfulness. So I'll do another big talk on cueing at some point because it's another topic I could go on with for a long time. But we're wanting to think about, how do we tell people in the simplest way what to do, the necessary information to do this exercise. These are your verbal cues, straightforwards, what's moving, what's staying still. Then we want to filter in some useful cues. What is going to help you do this better? And I want to make sure I'm not just saying the same thing because I've learned that, and not watching the people in front of me. Because if you're saying something and they're all doing it, people are going to be like, oh, I thought I was sitting on my sitting bones. Am I not sitting on my sitting bones? So we want to be careful of that too, that you're watching what you're seeing. But what useful information can we go in? This is often where imagery comes in. It could be really beautiful, flowery imagery. I like quite anatomical imagery. But this is another piece that I sometimes see missing. Either it's not included at all, or it's brought in too quickly and people are lost. Especially beginners and newer movers, they need the necessary stuff and they need a little bit of useful. Then when you start to get more advanced movers, you can be a lot more flowery and creative with those useful cues, and you can add in the fun and the fluff and the sexy stuff that we as teachers now often like. But we need to be careful that our newer clients are going to be like, what do you mean this roll up is blue? Or something, we can go that crazy with good movers and they're like, yeah, this yellow roll up is different to this blue roll up. I'd never thought of it like that before. And we can be quite abstract, but we're wanting to think about how we're cueing people and how we're making them understand and feel this movement. I always remember one of my students said, I want to cue how I want the client to feel. And I thought that's a beautiful way of phrasing it. And I think just to lean back into the subtlety, what I see some teachers doing is using the spiciest of languages. For me, if an exercise is spicy, I am trying to find the softest language I can use. How can I ease you into this exercise? How can I help you find the ease, the flow, the balance, even in a snake and twist or a teaser on the long box? Because I've done this with my students. I've said, I'm going to cue this two ways. One is feel the burn, notice how heavy this is, press into this, lift, feel yourself working really hard. And then I'll cue it in a different way that's about bounce and ease and feel, and just float the legs up and lengthen the arms. And I'll use lots of kind of intonation in my voice. And I'll say, which way felt easier? And they'll be like, the way that you use the lightness of your cueing. And which way do you think was the most beneficial for your body? The bit that felt harder or the same exercise that felt easier? They're like, oh, I suppose it's the exercise that felt easier because my body is more balanced and is doing it in, using more of the muscles that often we don't use. Because I think that's what Pilates is famous for. These very subtle muscles that don't get called on in the big, powerful movements. And if we cue things in a big, powerful way, then really we're just leaning into that. So I'm always interested. I find it quite interesting, this spicy Pilates movement. It's not that I don't like my Pilates spicy. It's not that I only do easy things. I just have loved having instructors that help me find the ease in these big movements. Because if you find the ease in them, you've got more to give. And we need to be thinking of that right down the chain with our early movers. Because if a quadruped feels super hard, they're never going to get to a long stretch with ease, are they? They need to learn how to do these with ease. So the words that we choose, thinking about the lightness, the ease, these are all such big parts of how we can create a successful class that is mindful, that is meditative, that helps rehab and balances your body. Of course, it strengthens tones. That is a given, but we can go so much deeper with this work and really tie into people's mental health calming down, as well as their body feeling stronger and more efficient. So I hope you have enjoyed and taken away something from today's little talk on the subtlety of this movement and how we can bring that into our class planning. I will do another talk on the cueing, the science of cueing, and the effectiveness of cueing, because I know that we could go so much deeper on that too. But maybe just play with some of these ideas of starting supine legs, supine arms, finishing standing. having full body integration towards the end, building people up to it and making sure that we're doing spine movement in every direction, weight bearing, and we're bringing some seated exercises in. And remembering that Pilates isn't done to be good at Pilates. Pilates is to be good at life. And with that, I will say goodbye for this week, and I will see you next week for another episode of Beyond the Reformer.